All right, today we're tackling a big one. We're going to step away from the usual slogans and headlines to actually look at the philosophy of abortion. We're going to explore how thinkers build their arguments around one of the most complex moral questions of our time. Okay, let's dive in. So here's what we've got on tap. First, we're going to nail down the central moral question that's really at the heart of everything. Then, we'll get into two of the biggest arguments you'll hear, one based on a right to life and another that's all about the loss of a future. After that, we'll zoom in on the really tricky issue of selectivity, and then we'll wrap up by talking about why all this abstract philosophy actually matters so much in the real world. Okay, so first up, the central moral question. Look, the goal of philosophy here isn't to give us some easy, clean answer. It's to bring clarity and structure to a really, really messy debate. Now, just to make sure we're all on the same page, let's start with a basic, neutral definition. Abortion is the intentional termination of a pregnancy, period, whether that's through surgery or medication. This is our common ground for the whole conversation. And this right here, this is the core of it all. This single question we're zeroing in on is a moral one, not a legal one. It's simply this: is abortion morally wrong? Every argument we're about to look at is trying to answer that question. Let's get into our first major argument. This is probably the one you're most familiar with. It's the argument from a right to life. You can see how this is built, right? It's like a logical chain. It starts with a simple premise. A fetus is a person. From there, it says all persons have a right to life. So, the fetus has a right to life. And since it's wrong to kill something with a right to life, and abortion does just that, the conclusion is that abortion must be morally wrong. Seems pretty straightforward, but this is where things get really interesting. So how do you even begin to challenge an argument like that? Well, one of the biggest objections zeroes in on that one little word, person. It points out that the argument sneakily uses the word in two different ways. See, a fetus is a person in the biological sense, a human being. That makes premise one seem true. But when we say all persons have a right to life, we usually mean beings with moral status. That makes premise two seem true. The objection is that the argument only works if you swap the definitions halfway through. That's a logical no-no called equivocation. Now, another huge challenge to this argument comes from one of the most famous thought experiments in all of modern philosophy. It comes from Judith Jarvis Thomson. I want you to just imagine this. You wake up one morning, and you're in a hospital bed, and you find you're plugged into this world-famous violinist. Turns out, he has this super rare kidney ailment, and you're the only person on Earth who can save him. Now, you didn't consent to this. You were kidnapped by the Society of Music Lovers and hooked up against your will. The doctors tell you that you just have to stay plugged in for 9 months. If you unplug yourself any sooner, he'll die.
So, what do? The violinist is a person. He has a right to life. But this was forced on you. Are you allowed to unplug?
And here's the kicker. Thomson argues that almost everyone would say, yes, you have the right to unplug yourself. And if that's true, it blows a hole in premise 4 of that original argument, the idea that it's always wrong to kill something that has a right to life. Her point is that a right to life doesn't automatically grant you the right to use someone else's body to stay alive.
Okay, let's pivot to a totally different line of reasoning. This is the loss of a future argument. And what makes it so powerful is that it tries to sidestep that whole messy debate about personhood altogether.
This one comes from the philosopher Don Marquis, and he starts with a really basic question. What makes killing an adult human wrong? His answer isn't about their personhood or anything like that. He says it's wrong because you rob them of a future of value, all the experiences, relationships, and joys they would have had. So the argument goes, since a fetus also has a valuable future ahead of it, abortion is wrong for the exact same reason.
But of course, there's a strong counter to this too. The objection is, does a fetus really possess its future in the same way an adult does? The idea is that for a future to really be yours, something you can lose, you need some kind of psychological connection to it. Memories, desires, plans that connect who you are now to who you'll be. An early-term fetus doesn't have that. So this view says its future isn't future like ours in the way that matters morally. All right, let's narrow our focus a bit now to a really specific and complex corner of this debate: selective abortion. This is where the reason for the abortion takes center stage, especially when it's related to a prenatal diagnosis of a disability. This is called the expressive argument, and it basically says that when you choose to abort a fetus because it has a disability, you're sending a message, a bad one. You're expressing the idea that disabled people are less valuable or that their lives are not worth living. And if expressing that kind of discrimination is morally wrong, then, the argument goes, this specific kind of abortion is also morally wrong.
But, as you can imagine, it's not that simple. Philosophers have pushed back in a few key ways. One response is that parents aren't making a judgment about the child's value, but about their own ability to provide the right kind of care. Another objection asks, well, does this expression actually cause harm in a world already full of prejudice? And a third response makes a really subtle but important distinction. It says the choice expresses that a particular disability is a negative thing to have, which is not the same as saying the person with it is less valuable. So, after all this abstract argument, why does any of it really matter? Well, it's because this debate goes way, way beyond the 9 months of a pregnancy. It gets to the very heart of what it means to have autonomy and to become a parent. This quote from the source material really puts a fine point on it. For many, many people, this isn't just about the physical act of pregnancy. It's about being able to control the massive, life-changing decision of when and if to become a parent. That ability is seen as absolutely fundamental to a person's autonomy. And that's really the crucial point, isn't it? The stakes are incredibly high, because the conversation isn't just about the moral status of a fetus. It's also fundamentally about a person's freedom to choose whether or not to take on the profound, lifelong responsibility of being a mother. And that leaves us right here, wrestling with this incredibly difficult question. All these arguments, they keep circling back to this fundamental conflict of values. When a potential right to life is on one side and the right to bodily autonomy and self-determination is on the other, how do we decide which one matters more? There's no easy answer, but at least understanding the arguments is a start.